One of our speakers, the infamous David Duncan, got his funding pulled this week to come to visit us. Boo. There we go. Perfect. So you get to hear from me. You get a bit of a recycled talk, but I think that it's useful pretty much anywhere. So we're going to go through it.
I would like a little voice.
I am happy to take questions during or after, however you want to do it. I also wanted to point out something that I was really excited about. I made postcards. If you like to get stuff in the mail, then you should also send stuff in the mail. And the thing that I love most about getting stuff in the mail is just little, like it's never letters, because if we're doing things that are timely, it's in a text or a call or an email. Like I'm not sending you things that are important. So I send you things that are really dumb. So you'll see a few of the options are like lists. Like here's my 5 favorite things about this thing. You should definitely pick one up. I should definitely fill it out. Send it to your parents, send it to your spouses, send it to your friends. They all love them. My nieces and nephews love them too. But also, here's the bonus. The thing that I always hate the most about, and find the hardest to do about sending mail, is getting stamps. So if you leave them at registration, I will mail them to you, or mail them out for you on Monday when I mail out mine out. So there you go. Pick them up, fill them out, it's a good time. Okay, so we're going to talk about open source. We'll start with, you're not really here to hear about me, but this is me. I'm a dork. I've been around in open source for a while. I've been around in tech for a longer time. I also know a lot of the people in this room have been involved in open source longer than I have. So as we're going through this, if you have counterexamples or different ideas or anything like that, I'm always happy to hear it. I have no ego. That's okay. We're good for that. This is my dog. She's my favorite thing in the world, and you should say hi to her too. So the first thing that we need to talk about when we're talking about how you contribute to open source or where you contribute to open source, and the thing that's gotten a lot of confusion lately is the definition of open source. We're going to specifically talk about licensing here and I bring that up because there are a lot of people that say defining open source also needs to talk about whether or not you build a community around the project or whether or not you allow external contributors into whatever you're doing. I'm not going to get into that. We're only talking about licensing when we're talking about this definition. If you want to take a deeper look, there are lots of articles, there are lots of talks, there are lots of other places to get deeper. We're going to do this extremely high level because this isn't really where I want to focus today. There are lots of places you can look online. Calling a collection of code open source requires specifically that it be released under an open source license. While there are more than 100 licenses that exist that qualify as open source licenses, these are by far the most popular, right? These are the ones that most of us are familiar with on a daily basis. These licenses collectively are used by more than 60% of open source projects. So you're definitely going to run into these the most commonly. And these can be split into 2 groups generally. There are a lot of nuances. There are a lot of different things that you might pull away from this, but generally, the simple definition is that copyleft requires, among other things, that you retain the license of the source code that you are modifying, and permissive give a whole lot more freedom to the person that is using or modifying the code, generally. The list of things that is not open source could be really long, but it's basically this, right? Anything that is not using an OSI-approved license. Okay, a little bit more verbose, right? Any source available licenses also not open source, right? But who gets to decide that, right? For nearly 30 years, the Open Source Initiative has been responsible for the definition of open source, for championing and guarding that definition. They were founded in 1988. They're the stewards and act as the general authority for what open source is. To quote from their website, the open source label was created as at a strategy session held on February 3rd in 1998 in Palo Alto, California, shortly after the announcement of the release of the Netscape source code. The strategy session grew from a realization that the attention around Netscape's announcement had created an opportunity to educate and advocate for the superiority of open source and open development. At that founding session, they wrote the first version of the open source definition, which was originally derived from the Debian free software guidelines and was later expanded in 2004 to the definition that we actually still use today. So that thing is 21 years old, which is incredible. As I said before, open source doesn't just mean code, but also includes a list of guidelines around the distribution of that code. Any of the, it was like 100 open source licenses or OSI approved licenses will allow software to be freely distributed, freely used, freely modified, and freely shared, while maintaining general neutrality and completely without discrimination. Though you might not think so, this actually does allow for a lot of flexibility. You get a lot of freedom, and if you want to take a look and you have a couple of days to kill and a couple of pots of coffee, you can go through all of the licenses that the OSI has approved at that website down there. It is incredible, and it takes a lot of effort. But I think it's worth it if you are actually the kind of dork that likes to learn about licensing. The biggest reason that open source is getting kind of muddy right now, the definition of open source is getting kind of muddy, is number 5 and 6 here, right? The lack of discrimination is key. It's a key part of the open source definition. These two things are, at least for me, the most lofty and idealistic parts of the open source definition. Because as humans, we discriminate all the time. Whether it's religion or Vim versus Emacs, which are basically the same thing, whether it's those who make rainbow cakes or those who make bombs, whether it's those who make money off their code or those who don't, whether it's, I forgot I put this joke in here, whether it's those who say that you should put the tea bag in the bottom of your cup before you put the hot water, and those who are wrong. The key part here is that if we start to discriminate in any way, no matter what, around who uses our licenses, it no longer meets the definition of open source. We're not talking about whether or not you should, whether or not you could, but currently, if you do that, it no longer meets the definition of open source. No matter what we agree on or disagree on, I don't get to decide what you do or don't do with my code if it's released under an open source license. And having such a strict definition is part of the reason that open source has seen so much success. Because if you don't limit it, then anybody can use it, right? It means that open source can be used everywhere. We see no industry in the world that doesn't use open source software in some way, period. Every single industry uses open source software in some way. That's a pretty good list, but it's not comprehensive by any means. But it also means that it can be created in all of these places. For me, therein you will find both the source of my excitement and the source of my concerns when we start talking about how you decide when you will get involved and how you get involved in open source projects. So let's talk about evaluation a little bit. For the purposes of today's talk, I am going to assume that you have, actually I have a slide for this. You have already generally decided that you know how to contribute to open source in general. You already know what programming languages you like to use or don't like to use. You already know what technologies you want to help or don't want to help. You are working on evaluating a project or a group of projects in general to help you whittle down the list, right? Because we all have things that excite us on a daily basis, but you can't physically get involved in every single thing because nobody has that much time, period. I also feel like I would be remiss if I didn't cover a few things that I don't see in the guides that are online that help you decide what you want to contribute to. And these two kind of get glossed over or are very optimistically approached in the guides that I see on the internet. First, when it comes to the time you have to contribute, you have to be extremely honest with yourself, right? Even those that have been in open source for a long time, we still need this reminder, so pay attention. I speak to myself every time I do this talk, as much as I talk to anybody else. When you're talking about the time that you have to contribute to open source, or the resources, whether it's time or other, you need to consider two specific things. You need to recognize two specific things. I think we're getting better about this one as an industry, but it still bears repeating. Open source projects take a lot of time. They take a lot of energy. And often, we as humans will walk into a room and say, oh no, I've done that 40 million times. I know how to do that. That's no problem. Not remembering that it also, just because you know how to do it, doesn't mean that it won't take time, right? I can write a blog post in an hour if I know the topic. It's still an hour. And that hour that I'm promising to a blog post has to be accounted for someplace else too. Your time is the currency that you have, and it is a currency that can be spent. And like a currency, it is limited, right? A lot of first-time contributors fall into this trap, but us old fogies do too. It does not matter. Once you like a project, you get excited, right? You get excited, you overcommit, you underdeliver, and now everybody's sad. It happens all the time because you get excited, you're passionate, you want to contribute, you want to do something to help this project that you care about, but your time is limited. You have to keep that in mind. This is the cycle we get into, whether you have been doing this forever or you're brand new to it. It is a hard thing to keep in mind. Please start with small expectations of yourself so that you are not overextending, overpromising, and underdelivering, both for the project, because we care about the project, and for yourself, because you don't need to set yourself up to fail, right? Even if the work is easy, it's still work, and life happens. You gotta keep that in mind. So I'm gonna assume, if you're here, you already understand that open source is a place for everyone. You already understand that it's for people of all backgrounds, all skill sets. We come together, we pool our time, energy, and expertise, and we come up with incredible and fantastic things. You can get real-world coding experience, you can get real-world marketing experience if you come work with me. You can build a community of like-minded people that, or not even like-minded people, that you get to interact with on a regular basis and build the relationships with those people. And you can give back. If you are somebody who has been around for a long time and you have been in an industry that has benefited from open source, you can start to feel like, I really want to contribute to this thing that has helped me build my career. In all of those cases, being intentional about where you put your energy and your time is an important thing. So that, coupled with this, is absolutely how things start to get muddy. If you aren't at this stage yet, then I'm going to recommend go find some guides. It's pretty easy to find any that are pretty descriptive and helpful. Quick Google search brought me this one. Honestly, any of them that are out there, read at least 3 or 4, read ones that have different ideas and don't just regurgitate the same thing that you read on the one before, because we all know how that happens and why that happens. At least find a few that give you different perspectives and different ideas.
Don't ask ChatGPT.
Don't ask ChatGPT. In those guides, there is one thing that I almost never see discussed. So we're going to talk about that one too. It doesn't matter where the code is stored, how idealistic we want to be about how people will come together to build that software, or how we expect the software to be used. Somebody has to pay for the hardware, somebody has to pay for the bandwidth, somebody has to pay for the hosting. You cannot produce software without money being involved, period. At some level. I don't care if it's you and your buddies, somebody's paying for the hosting somewhere, right? The definition of open source does not take that into account at all. It doesn't talk about money. It doesn't talk about how these projects get their funding at all. So let's break it down. I fought with myself a bunch about how I was going to present this, but ultimately what I decided, I'm going to immediately exclude you and 4 of your friends are making something really cool, or you by yourself. I'm going to immediately exclude anything that is, well, mostly it's just that one. Like if it's a single person or a small group, that's what's getting excluded in these definitions. There's already a mutual understanding. I'm not going to worry about that one. But if you're looking at an open source project that has a non-single person funding, and typically there are either corporate backed or foundation backed. And that's what we're going to split here. Corporate backed means, to me, there's a single company that is producing and stewarding an open source project, and there are external contributors, but the company owns and controls the project pretty much exclusively. Foundation backed means there's generally a nonprofit foundation entity that is fiscally and morally responsible for stewarding the project itself. Ideally, it isn't driven by commercial gain, but that can't be excluded. For corporate backed, you can think about these. Automatic, Nginx, Chef. There is an open source project, there is an active community, but it is backed by a single corporation, right? Foundation backed can actually be broken down further into 2 groups. We've got both the massive multi-project foundations. For that one, think about the Apache Foundation, the Eclipse Foundation, the Linux Foundation. They are massive, and they have, especially the Linux Foundation. The Linux Foundation has so many projects that most of the time, the projects in them don't even know the other projects exist, right? It's just massive. Those projects may collaborate, may not collaborate. They may or may not know each other exist. They may or may not compete, honestly. So that's one set. Or they have their own foundation, which is the Rust, like the examples I'm going to give you here are the Rust Foundation, the GNOME Foundation, and hilariously, the AlmaLinux Foundation. Because if I try to put the AlmaLinux Foundation next to the other 2, both in size and in scale and in scope, it's pretty funny. But I would be silly to not put it up there anyway. This is a good spot to remind you that I'm not saying one is better than the other. There is no good and evil here in these definitions. They all have their place in the open source world. It's just how you break it down. Each of these structures has their motivation for existing. Each of these structures has a specific type of person that contributes to them. And that's why understanding these structures is important when you're deciding where to put your time, right? If you're excited about a project, no matter where it gets its funding, that's probably the best place for you to be. I don't care. I'm not going to judge you for finding your comfort in a place that I wouldn't. If you're having fun there, live your life. A corporate project means that you, as a consumer of that project, can be fairly sure that a project has a solid financial backing because there are people who are motivated for keeping it alive. A foundation-backed means that you can be much more certain you're going to find a place to fit in and contribute because they do the work that the community wants, and that means that it's the work that people show up to do, right? Most of them will be nonprofits, and you're much less likely to find things like contributor guides and documentation that is complete and all of the things that are hard to get people to volunteer to do. That also means that sometimes you're going to walk into a room that is a bit chaotic. If you haven't seen Community, I highly recommend it. It's a great show. Programmers don't always like to write documentation. Finding free documentation writers is very hard. You might have to walk in and say, hi, I want to know how to use this, and I can write it down how I use it. Where should I put that? Or the chaos of of walking into this room might be a bit off-putting, but it means that there is absolutely an opportunity for you to jump in if you want to, if you can find comfort there. It doesn't always look like this, I promise. It's not normally like actually on fire, but sometimes it can feel like it. And those are the places that you can have the most impact. Because, like I said, if you just walk in and say, hey, I'd like to write this, but I need to chat with somebody who knows what it's about or how it works, who's got the time, I guarantee you someone will say, yeah, absolutely, I can give you, half an hour of my time talking you through this so that you can actually document it. 100%. All the time. Anyway, so that's my extremely short attempt at diving into a huge topic that is how you decide where you put your money. Open source really is for everyone and all perspectives and all places of origin. But if you're like me and you want to weigh what you're doing based on your own morals, one of the easiest ways to do that is follow the money, right? It doesn't matter which project you pick, there will always be money. There will always be something that is driving it. It also is important to say that both of these options can be used to obfuscate motivations, right? I've seen companies create open source projects and then sell those projects or gift those projects to a place that doesn't necessarily support it or have the infrastructure to maintain it. I've seen companies build projects and then not build a community around it and not maintain it, and it just kind of dies. I've seen companies start using an open source project because they're really cool, and then kind of end up taking over the project because they know how cool it is, they're really invested in it continuing to exist, and so they show up with a bunch of employees to help. And there isn't much of a community around it already, so now the whole project is run by one company. It's not intentional, they just got excited. But now that's the kind of thing that happens. You can also look at who's leading the project and how the governance works. These are options that I see most commonly, but I also see them all blended together in different ways, like the different options there. For example, AlmaLinux is a combination of these. We have a board that is elected by our community, and we have ALESCO, which is the engineering steering committee that manages itself. It's all self-managed and self-appointed. We also absolutely have a duocracy where the work that gets done is what people show up to do. So 100%, that's the kind of stuff that you should take a look at when you're figuring it out. And I'm going to wrap it up with this. This is a quote from a buddy of mine who was doing a keynote at the Ohio Linux Fest a couple of years ago. If you care about open source, you have to show up for it. You cannot sit on the sidelines. It doesn't continue to exist. It doesn't continue to grow if you don't show up. Just consuming the open source software does not mean that it's going to continue to exist. So I encourage you that if you're benefiting from open source in some way, find a way to give back, whether it's money or people or just showing up for the foundation, showing up for the SIGs, whatever you want to do. The way that we as a global community make open source continue to exist is by showing up. It works best when we do it together. And that's it. Questions? You have 1 minute. Go ahead. Oh, we're getting a microphone. Hang on 1 second.
I'll drag it around. I thought it was under there.
Yeah.
Tristan's got it.
I got it.
Tristan's being impossible. Over there.
You can go over 1 minute.
So going back to the definition of open source, and specifically the discrimination portion.
Yeah.
With that in mind, I recall reading, Russian kernel developers being, removed as maintainers from the Linux kernel. How should, the OSI or the community respond? That's a form of discrimination in my mind, right? So what's the way forward there?
It gets really complicated there because the Linux Foundation is a US-based organization. And it sucks, but as US-based organizations, we are subject to US-based regulations. Like, I can't accept members from Iran. Like, it's extremely frustrating. We are super stuck in those sorts of ways. The open source community is gonna be regulated in some way no matter what. What the Linux Foundation did was what their lawyers told them to do. And we're, especially as an organization as big as the Linux Foundation, they're gonna be stuck with that, right? They have to do what is appropriate for their community. I won't say that we have done this at AlmaLinux, but as part of the open source world, we have definitely had conversations that are like, are there specific countries that are better to host open source organizations? Are there ways that we can lobby with our government specifically to reduce the friction there for open source? There is a lot of work that's being done between open source leadership and the United Nations, actually, to sort of, like, what do we do in these situations? Because especially as governments continue to increase regulation around open source and around software in general, they need to be able to understand the impacts that they're having in a very real way. There's a bunch of regulation that has happened in Europe in the last couple of years that has caused significant frustration for open source projects that ultimately boils down to the right people weren't in the room. And so those are the things that, as an open source community, we're trying to solve. We don't have an answer, right? It's an ongoing problem. I know that's not really an answer. Who else?
All right, so I'm gonna out myself a little bit here. So I'm a systems and networks administrator. I've been working for 15 years. I'm not a developer.
Yeah.
So I look at these situations as a plumber next to a bunch of physicists, right? How would someone who is not a developer who's not going to make a pull request on a project like this, frankly, because I'm insecure with my code,
Yep.
how would that contribute to something like AlmaLinux? Where would be an inroad? Because to me, I look at that, and I'm not a kernel developer. You guys are way better at the actual code than I am. Where would my skills be applicable in sort of a foundation
So
context?
there's two big ones. The easiest one for me to talk about is anything marketing or events, because that's what I manage for AlmaLinux. But like I do that full time. That gives you an idea of the amount of work that goes into actually promoting an open source project. I guarantee every open source project that you encounter is in need of some kind of promotion. Documentation, also huge. The number of things that are like outdated or wrong or just not written down somewhere, always a big deal. That also typically requires some amount of technical understanding. So if you don't have that, I'm back to just talk about your love of open source. Like the amount of places and times that all you had to do was say, actually, I know about this one project that does this one thing, that then expands the adoption of open source in general and also starts to expand people's understanding of what software is huge. You don't have to pick any specific thing to contribute to. Just reshare our posts on the social media sites. Like it's any simple thing that expands awareness is already a huge help. Or show up to an event like this.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
You do networking? Thanks, Bruce. Yes. The infrastructure team needs help.
The infrastructure team always needs help.
Just to follow on to that, for any sysadmins in the room, bug reports, QA, like
Bug
testing
reports,
on new
yes,
hardware.
yes, thank you.
Please.
Yeah.
Yes.
Honestly, we'll start with bad bug reports if you reply. If I say to you, I need more information, and you never reply, you're getting ignored. Anybody else? Awesome. Thank you, guys. Okay, bye. Come fill out your postcards. And if you don't do it now, you can do it at dinner.
Thanks, Benny.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Benny, again for this, for filling up at the last minute. The next thing is our workshop, actually, which is a presentation of Lenovo. This workshop could not have been done without the help of Lenovo to send us gear to do this. So I want to give them a big shout out. Thank you very much, Lenovo. We'll welcome